My name is Thomas Bespel. I am the resident writing consultant at the CBS Library. And I'm also sometimes a librarian, so you might have seen me down in the library. And you're certainly welcome to come and ask me librarian type questions, and you're also welcome to come and ask me about this talk or anything that comes up from that as well. My contact information is available on the website. You'll get a link to that if you've registered for this. And other than that, and I'll put it on the board and stuff like that, so you should be able to follow up like that. This is the Art of Learning series, and it's something we started last year. It's kind of a privilege. I get to talk about what I think is the purpose of and the way of getting the most out of university. And the talk today is about how to write, which is really central to my sort of in my wheelhouse, as they say. So I'm going to talk about that, but I want to just quickly situate it in the overall framework of the talk of the series, so that you get a sense of what else there is and where you can get more information about some of the topics I'm going to cover really quickly. Normally, if I was speaking to you in your classes, I might spend a little more time on some of these things, but there's a whole talk devoted to each of them. So I'm just going to pass very quickly over them. Some of the talks have already been held, and some of you have attended those. Some of them are coming up. All of them are recorded either from last year or from this year. That's not exactly true. Some of them are recorded from last year, but by the end of this semester, we'll have a video for each of them. So all of this information will be there. The organizing principle of these talks is the universal symbol of writing, an iceberg. And I've then adopted this as also the universal symbol of knowledge. And some of you, maybe if you're taking organizational culture, have also run into this as a metaphor for culture, right? And it's probably used in other situations as well. Of course, the reason for that is what Hemingway said. Hemingway's description of this is the dignity of the movement of an iceberg lies in only 1/8 of it being above water. So what it indicates is that you're going to, as a learner, as you're learning, you're going to be developing a competence, and the dignity, the value, the authority of that competence, the fact that you're a knowledgeable person, right? That you've learned something, that you're learned, we sometimes say, is an indication of something under the surface. You're always going to be able to indicate much more than you can show in any given performance, in any given interaction. And that's really what I want to draw attention to, is a knowledgeable person has much more under the surface than they're able to sort of prove in the moment, right? So whatever demonstration of their knowledge you run into, what you're impressed with is how much more there must be, right? And so you want to kind of get a sense of that. If what's under the surface is knowledge, then please remember that that's not some sort of lifeless, dead material asset that you've acquired, like gold, and you've put it in the bank, right? And it's there, and then you can borrow money against it. It's nothing like that. It is a competence. In English, we talk about being knowledgeable. So you are enabled by knowing to do things, and you are also able to know things, right? So you've acquired this knowledge, and so you're knowledgeable. So you are now able to know things, more things than you've learned at school. And that competence that is under the surface has a corresponding performance above the surface. And we can itemize that performance. We can sort of say, what are the things that you are able to do because you're knowledgeable? And what are you better able to do than people who don't have your knowledge, right? What is it that you're capable of now? What are you capable of now that you weren't capable of last year? What are you capable of when you graduate that you aren't capable of today? That kind of thing. You can really think about it in those sort of performance-oriented terms. And there's really three things. You are better able to think about issues related to your discipline. You are better able to talk And I always emphasize you're better able to talk to other knowledgeable people. You're just not able to entertain your family and friends, right? You're able to talk to people who have the same qualifications that you have. And of course, what we're going to talk about today is you're better able to write about those things than most people. You're just a better writer on your area of expertise, the field that you've studied, than most people. Under the surface of your ability to think, if we were to unpack that philosophically, we would say you are able to make up your mind about stuff better than most people, right? If I was to get into a marketing related area or a finance related question or read something in the newspaper that had to do with accounting or something like that, right? That I wouldn't be able to make up my mind about it, but you are in a position to make up your mind about that. So you're able to form a belief. All of this, I'm not going to spend too much time writing all of this, right? So all of this is available from the past talks. You're better able to form a belief. It is more likely to be true, right? And I can form a belief about many things. It's not as likely to be true as the beliefs that you have in your area of expertise. And you're able to provide a good reason, a justification for that belief. So you form a belief, it's likely to be true, and you know why it's true, right? And when you say why you think it's true, that sounds like a good reason, right? You've got a good reason to think those things. Very quick philosophy lesson there. Knowledge is justified true belief, right? And there's some people who would discuss whether or not that's the best possible definition, but it's a pretty good place to start, right? What about talking? Talking can also be described as a competence that you have. It is the ability to distinguish between good and bad questions. There is such a thing as a stupid question. No matter what your teachers tell you, right? You can be ill-informed and ask a question that could have been better formed if you'd used your knowledge. There's also good and bad research questions, right? So when you get to the point where you're writing research papers, you really articulate a good question, right? And that's part of your skill. It's what you use your knowledge for. Knowledgeable people have a shared sense of humor, right? They get each other's jokes, and they get jokes that ignorant people, come on in, that ignorant people, people who are not educated in the discipline don't get. Can I get you to close the door, please? So there's certainly a shared sense of humor. I usually also emphasize here that just as you start finding things funny that people who don't know the same things that you know don't find funny, the opposite is also true. If you learn enough about accounting or law or finance, then there's a lot of easy jokes about Wall Street or lawyers or any things like our accountants that suddenly are not funny anymore because you understand how serious this activity actually is, right? So it's not as easy to make fun of accountants after you've taken 5 years of accounting at CBS, right? Because you know what a skill that is. And then of course, there's the thing, and I talk more about this in the How to Talk lecture. And I'm trying to think, that's coming up. I did it last year. I haven't done it yet this year. It's coming up. The How to Talk lecture, there is such a thing as saying the wrong thing in a conversation among knowledgeable people. There are things that are not okay to say, right? There's political correctness, and it's worth learning how to manage that difficulty. It's a difficult part of the conversation. It's not something you should be necessarily so afraid of you don't go near it, but it is something that you should recognize is there, and it's part of your knowledge, it's part of your skill, it's part of your competence to be able to have those conversations when necessary within your discipline, right? You don't have to have all the difficult conversations in society. You just have to have the ones that pertain to your discipline, right? You have to be good at that. And that's what you use your knowledge for. And then we're going to talk today about writing, so I'll just leave that mainly blank. Underneath that, I guess deeper, even more under the surface, kind of hidden away, under the ability to think, talk, and write, which we can perform quite openly, and we can sort of recognize that, right? We can recognize good thinking, we can recognize good talking, we can recognize good writing. Under that, sort of silently hidden away, there is actually the ability to feel that is related to thinking. Just like underneath your writing, there's going to be a lot of reading, right? So you're gonna be good at reading. That's a competence you have, and it underpins your writing ability in many ways. And of course, under any good talker, you'll find, if you really watch, how do they do it, right? How do good talkers talk? You'll probably find, I hope, that they listen, right? That they have that skill as well. They're good at figuring out what's going on in a conversation. They're good at attending lectures and that sort of thing, right? And the ability to feel under the ability to think is both a kind of keeping your emotions kind of disciplined and at bay, staying composed in a situation where things can get a little bit tricky. But it's also, I really emphasize, and I didn't want to do a talk on how to feel. That just sounded a little bit too fluffy. So I decided to do a talk on how to enjoy things instead, right? So how to get a kind of a good feeling out of the whole learning process. And this is actually, if you've seen the program for the whole series, you can see this is basically all here, right? How to think, how to talk, how to write, how to enjoy things, how to listen, how to read. These are all individual talks in the series. And then there's the capstone talk called How to Know Things Again, which refers back to the first lecture, which is this called How to Know Things. And in the How to Know Things Again, we're going to obviously kind of summarize, recap, talk about the same things we've been talking about all along, but also talk about how to maintain this competence going forward after graduation, right? So you've become knowledgeable. That means you've acquired knowledge, but you've also developed the skill of knowing things again and again and learning things as you go. And I'm going to try to emphasize that skill and how you have it. Right? Does that make sense? Good. I'm going to be drawing a lot of icebergs today, but they're not going to be all the same. And my first move that I want to do as far as getting into this how to write, we need more ocean, we need more icebergs. Getting into this how to write thing is we're going to turn our iceberg a little bit. I'm not sure that metaphor works perfectly, but we'll sort of turn it so that the writing is the thing that is above the surface. And then we'll put the thinking and the talking kind of under the surface. And I should say, my habit in doing these lectures has been to write quickly and somewhat helplessly as I go. And then I go back to my office tomorrow and on my whiteboard back there, I draw nice little versions of these drawings. And then I post those along with the video tomorrow. And so I apologize in advance for my terrible handwriting. It's because I'm nervous, of course. So we'll focus on the writing as the real performance. The thing we're really interested in right now is how to write. And then we will just remind ourselves that the ability to think is actually the ability to identify the propositional content of our beliefs, right? Remember that thinking is this ability to form beliefs. And so if we believe something, obviously that's what we want to write about. So we want to write about our beliefs. But we want to write about it in a way that is open to criticism. And one of the things I emphasized in the How to Think lecture, no, I should call it a talk, it's a talk, in the How to Think talk, is that by identifying the propositional content of our beliefs, we're actually opening them to the idea that we could be wrong. So thinking, the ability to think, is really an openness to being wrong about something. So we say, I have this belief, but because I'm also an intelligent person and I can think, I can figure out what would be the case if I were wrong. How would it be if I were wrong? And I can kind of figure out what the consequences of that might be. What other beliefs would I have to adjust? That's really what thinking is. And so keep in mind that underneath this ability to write is not just holding beliefs, not just having convictions. Under the ability to write is the ability to identify that part of your thinking that could be wrong, and then finding a way of presenting that clearly so that you can figure out if you're wrong, right? And the same actually goes for the for talking. There's also a kind of a thing we can say there. We can say that the talk, the important thing that anchors on is conversation. So if you're able to talk, you're conversant about your subject matter, right? And then you can say, well, how am I going to present this in writing in such a way that it enters a conversation, right? That it actually meets other people, that it has a kind of dialogical quality. So really, please do keep that in mind. That's how it works. And then underneath this, and we'll get to it in a second as well, underneath this just propositional and conversational content, there is, of course, what we had over here. There's this reading, right? So keep that in mind. You're going to base it on your reading. You'll also base it on, on your experience. And we'll get to that definitely in a moment, because experience figures into your writing in a very important sense, especially in academic writing. Experience isn't the only thing you draw on, but it does have a place in your academic writing. And I'll try to show you exactly where you can kind of maintain that academic sense of experience. And then, of course, there's going to be a lot of thinking. There's going to be a lot of reasoning, right, that is underneath all of this. And then I do want to stress, and this goes to the question of enjoying this business. It's kind of the site of enjoying writing, the place it happens for you, and is where you really kind of think, this is where it becomes literary and fun, is that you will be using your imagination. And I'll try to really make that clear that when you're writing, you should try to write not just from a, like an idea of I have to say what this text says is the same, like I have to use these same words and this kind of thing, that kind of attitude. It's much better if you say I have an image in my mind and I want to try to put that image in my reader's mind. And so keep underneath all of this stuff, keep this idea of imagination in mind, also because if you do that, then you also develop your imagination and it becomes more enjoyable, becomes more pleasurable. And what we'll be talking about above the surface is paragraphs. And I will try to focus on that. One of the skill you want to have is the ability to write paragraphs. And by paragraphs, I want to be clear. If we took a page out of your writing, what I mean is that's sort of half a page. And if you're using Word, you might even have that little blue paragraph marker at the end when you hit the return button. Right? That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about roughly half a page. And I'll be much more specific about exactly what I mean by a paragraph. But when I say paragraph, that's what I mean. I don't mean pages and pages under a heading. I just mean that half page from a tab indent to a hard line return. It's really the thing that I'm looking for there. Got one more iceberg. There's another way that we want to think about our writing is both as something that ends up in a form like a research paper or even a dissertation. Sometimes you're just writing essays, but I'll just give you maybe the most complicated kind of outline or structure that we can imagine. And then we'll try to get that down into that unit, that paragraph-sized unit that you can write, that you can learn how to write well. So if you think about a standard research paper in the social sciences, let's do this slightly differently. Yes, we'll do it this way. Go back to Hemingway, and the 1/8 is above water. The dignity of the movement of the iceberg lies in only 1/8 of it being above water, so it's everything below. What Hemingway would say is that if you're going to write a story, And he was, very much into writing sort of adventurous stories. So he might write about lion hunting, right, or bullfighting, or war, or love, right? The greatest adventure, perhaps. What he would say is that if you're going to write with authority, with credibility about these subjects, you should have experienced bullfighting, or lion hunting, or war, or love, right? These are things that you should have some experience with if you are going to write stories about them. And then the iceberg method says, don't tell the reader everything you've experienced, right? Hold something back. Make sure that your writing indicates much more under the surface. So that a good story is one that selects that sequence of fact and motion from your experiences that presents those facts in such a way that the reader, and he promises you this if you're writing this way, right? That the reader will feel the presence of the experience that's under the surface that you're leaving out, right? So we can put experience down here under the surface. That is an actual basis on which even academic writing functions, but you're not going to be writing about your lion hunting vacation, even if you've had such a thing. You'll probably not be writing about it unless you've done the proper ethnographic, taken the proper ethnographic approach to it. What will happen is that every once in a while, you want to write in your own voice. You want to say, "Look, I'm tired of just presenting other people's ideas, presenting what I learned in lectures. I want to say something that is both academically credible and personal, coming from my own experience." And the experience you can write about without any problem is your data collection method, right? So what you can do is you can write about your methods. Because what is method? Method is the things you did and the reasons you did them to collect your data, right? So what happens is you go out, you need to find some data, and you organize your life in such a way that you can do those interviews, or you can do those on those ethnographic observations, or you send out those surveys, right? Or you go to our financial databases and you extract the data. But this is something you're actually doing. This is something that you as a real human being have set about to go out and do. And you can tell that story of what you did, what are the things you did, and why did you do them? Why were they good ways of collecting data, right? And then what's going to happen under the surface is that you generate a data set. But above the surface, you have a nice story you can tell. And what I'd really just encourage you to do is say, every once in a while, this is what you want to do. You want to pull back to the center of your knowledge endeavor, which is really, how do I collect data that I can take for given in my analysis? And so you can see you now have the beginnings of a structure of a research paper, right? We have the methods section, we have the analysis section, and we have it organized with things that are connected under the surface. There's also the theory section, and the theory section is there because this experience doesn't come it's not just something you do on a whim. It's not just something you do because you feel like it. It's something you do because you've read the literature, right? You've probably read some methods literature, but in even the theory literature that you've read, you've kind of figured out how to operationalize those concepts to make them a guiding framework for your methods. So you're going to have a lot of reading underneath here, and it's the scientific literature. But that's not the only framing you're going to do. You're probably going to say something about the company or the country or the region that you have studied, right? That your object has been kind of the background from which your object has been extracted and foregrounded. And that's going to be something that has some documentation of some kind. You may cite company reports, you may cite newspaper reportage, right? You may cite OECD data about the markets or countries that you're interested in. There may be some market reports that you have found, this sort of thing. There'll be some kind of documentation that you can cite. And of course, you're not going to cite every page of that, right? You're not going to cite every newspaper story about the background or the country that you're writing about. You'll choose the ones that are most useful to you and cite them for the most useful facts. So there'll be a lot under the surface that you're aware of, and you'll choose the right things. Then there's the discussion section. And in the discussion section, we normally write about sort of what the implications are. And in the, I should say that in the fall, no, in the spring, this is the fall. In the spring, there's another series of talks called The Craft of Research. And in that series, I just go through how to write a research paper. And we really get into detail on these things. I'm not going to talk too much more about that today, but we really get into sort of the interaction, the rhetorical structure between these different parts. But in the discussion section, we're talking about what do my results, what follows from my results? What are the implications or consequences of the things I've discovered? And so we're not really providing more sources for that. What we're doing is we're reasoning with the reader, right? We are going to say, this is what I think follows from logically, reasonably. And of course, reason goes into all these other things as well. Lots of things covered so far. It's going quite quickly. Now we're getting to the heart of the matter. And I think I have to do something like this. To the heart of the matter here. This may seem a little bit daunting to have such a big structure, right? Lots of different kinds of things under the surface that we're drawing on when we're writing, that we're trying to perform our competence with, our facility with these materials is what we're trying to perform, going above the surface. And what we want to do is get it down into a unit of composition that we can manage and that we can become good at composing, right? So we want to have a sense of a smaller task. And the metaphor that I've been using is, if that is an iceberg, this is not to scale, but this is now an ice cube. That might even help. Go. We have an ice cube, and the ice cube is the small part of which you want to have written a few, if you're going to, about one or two per page, probably about 2 per page. But keep Hemingway's math in mind that if you're a good writer, you've probably written many more paragraphs throughout your studies than you need. You have written a lot of paragraphs and you've handed in the ones that really work. So the whole trick here is how do we sort of get a sense of just producing these paragraphs, becoming good at producing them. And my suggestion to you is to say the following, and maybe this is actually a good thing to get back to just for a second. These 3 performances, some people feel really, really strong when they're on their own and just thinking things through. They feel quite smart when they're by themselves. Some people feel really, really strong when they're talking, right? But that's really when they're in a social situation and they're, that's just where they're at home. And then they feel a little bit out of their depth when they have to sit down and write. That's the thing that's giving them trouble, right? And I totally understand that. Writing is hard. What I want to remind you, though, is that it's one coherent competence. And so it's perfectly fine to remind yourself that you're actually a pretty good thinker and a pretty good talker. And you're going to draw on the same base of knowledge, the same strength you have as a thinker and talker when you're writing. So just remind yourself, this is something I can actually make up my mind about. It is something I would be able to speak my mind about. But now I'm sitting here by myself and I'm going to write about it. I should feel just as strong. And of course, when I do the How to Talk lecture, And I say, well, some people feel really strong when they're thinking and when they're writing, but they don't like being in my shoes. Right? They don't like standing here and talking. Then they just have to remind themselves, well, I'm strong at these two things. And now I have to practice this. I have to deploy that strength in my practicing to talk. So try to do that. Every time you sit down to write, just remind yourself, okay, I'm not totally weak intellectually. So I'm going to just sit here and write, and I'll be as strong as I am. Whatever the best strength I have, I'm going to draw on that. Whatever makes me a good talker or a good thinker, I'm going to use here when I'm writing. But then remember, it's not just the ability to make up your mind. It's not just the ability to speak your mind. Being knowledgeable at university is also the ability to compose a coherent prose paragraph about something, right? So you know something at university if you can compose a coherent prose paragraph about it, and you want to be clear about what that is, what is that difficulty, and then you want to face it head on and train yourself to become good at it. What is a paragraph is a really good question. Let's do this in blue if I can. A paragraph is at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words that says one thing and supports, elaborates, or defends it. So it says one thing, and then it supports, elaborates, or defends it. At least 6 sentences and at most 200 words. One of the things I like to emphasize is that when you're approaching form, you should do it like the poet Ezra Pound did. He said, think of form not as a box within which, but as a center around which. So I recognize that I've drawn this like a box and it feels a bit like a box, but I don't mean it like a box. I mean it like a center, a place to start. So you start with what is the thing I want to say, and then you say, I have at most 200 words around it, right? But I should put at least 6 sentences there. And it's a rule of thumb. So if you have a good reason, you can write fewer sentences or more words, but really do have a good reason. I think about why is this getting so long, or why is it okay that this is so short, or that I have so few sentences. Sometimes it's not actually a short paragraph, it's just long sentences, and you have a good reason for that. Right? Maybe it's stylistic reasons. Maybe it's some long lists. Maybe there's a big quote in your paragraph that explains why it's so long. Right? So there can be good reasons for a long paragraph. But just remember, most of them are going to be at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words. They're going to say one thing and they're going to support, elaborate, or defend it. I also emphasize that in most cases, you're making a choice. You're choosing between supporting, elaborating, or defending. You're not doing all 3. Although there will always be some mixture, and some paragraphs will always be a little bit hybrid. And the way you decide whether to support, elaborate, or defend is to listen to Virginia Woolf. She said, knowing who you're writing for is knowing how to write. Knowing who you're writing for is knowing how to write. So when you've decided what you want to say, now you say, who am I writing for? And that will help you decide how to say it. And this decision about what to say we'll get to as well. There are really 3 different reasons, problems you might have. Yes, sir? Yeah, so question is, why 6 sentences? It is, why, the question is why 6 sentences, which is a good question. It's sort of a convention. You can look at in your discipline and maybe they'll say you'll count sentences in the paragraphs and they all come out to maybe 4 or 5 on average. And then you can make an adjustment like that. You can say, well, in my discipline it's a bit different. Maybe most of the paragraphs in your discipline are longer. You can make an adjustment according to that. 6 sentences is kind of it's not completely made up, but it's kind of just a rough gesture at the, so that's, and why not something like 2 or 3? Like, why not very few sentences? The reason for that is you just want to make sure that the ideas you're presenting have some weight, right? That they have some substance. And by thinking in 6 sentences as a rule of thumb, you kind of force yourself to think, is this something that requires as much knowledge as I want on half a page? Right? It gets you to think in that unit. So it is just a rule of thumb, but it's a pretty effective one. So I encourage you to just, when you practice, to do that. What you do is you think of your reader and you think, why is it I can't just get away with 2 sentences, right? Why can't I get away with just, a little slip of paper on this? And the reason for that will be because the idea you're presenting, let's say you want to say sense making is a retrospective process. So that idea will be either hard to believe, understand, or agree with. So you're going to look at the idea you're going to present to the reader. You're going to articulate it in a sentence, usually a simple declarative sentence of some kind, like sense making is a retrospective process. My other favorite example is the internet has changed the way businesses communicate with their customers. Right? Probably true. And then you say to yourself, or it's something really, really banal, I guess, like Apple had a good 3rd quarter in 2017. Right? That may, I don't even know if that's true, but that may also be true. Right? And what you have to ask yourself is, what is the difficulty that I'm confronting my reader with in making a statement like that? Is it hard to believe? Is it hard to understand? Or is it hard to agree with? And in each of those cases, we're not going to say it's going to be really, really hard to believe, understand, or agree with, because it's going to be a difficulty that we can engage with, that we can face in about half a page. So it's not like a very, very big difficulty, but it's going to be a little bit of a difficulty. So with something like the performance of a company in a particular year or quarter, the reader is going to say, this, I have no trouble believing this really, but it's the sort of thing that I want to have evidence for, right? Do you have some documentation, right? Do you have an annual report? Have you, do you have the relevant basis to declare that they had a good 3rd quarter, right? But of course, you may say, well, everybody knows Apple had a good 3rd quarter in 2017 because Apple's had a good 3rd quarter for the last 20 years. It's not this is not news. What I want to know is, what exactly do you mean by a good quarter for Apple? And on which parameters? So what you can have is you say the reader's problem here isn't believing me. So I don't have to provide evidence that they did well. What I have to do is explain what I mean by good performance. Right? Yep.
Understand. So like one paragraph is only one message.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And a really good reason to remember that one paragraph, one idea for one paragraph, it can be a relatively big idea, like sense making is a retrospective process, which, okay, now we have lots of things to talk about there, right? One of the reasons to remember that is it tells you how many things you have to know to write your papers, right? Because if you're going to write a paper of 10 pages, it's going to be about 20 paragraphs. So you have to know 20 things to write it. And once you've decided what those 20 things are, it's going to be a lot easier to write. Right? Of course, if you're Hemingway, you can't just know 20 things. You have to know like 160 things, 20 of which you put on the surface, right? But that's kind of how you do that math. You can really feel like I have to decide what are the 20 things I'm going to claim to be true. What are the 20 things I have to make up my mind about and present to my reader? Right? That's going to be my writing problem. And then it can be hard to believe, so I provide some support. It can be hard to understand, so I provide some elaboration. And then the third, and I think the most interesting problem that you can have is you think about what you want to say, you think about your reader, and then you think, you know what? I think my reader has already made up their mind about this, and I think they don't agree with me. I think my reader has another opinion. It's different from mine. And so what I have to do is defend myself. I have to defend my position because my reader disagrees with me. So that's why I write these in red. It's hard to believe, it's hard to understand, and it's hard to agree with. There is a fourth difficulty that I leave out of the ice cube because it should be rare. I'll explain to you why it should be rare in a second. Suppose you think about what you want to say, like, and this is a good example. The internet has changed the way businesses communicate with their customers. This is what you want to say. You think, okay, is my reader going to have a hard time believing that? No. Is my reader going to have a hard time understanding it? Nope. Is my reader going to have a hard time agreeing? No, everybody agrees. The internet has changed, of course, the internet has changed everything. So what's the problem? The reader's bored. The reader finds that idea uninteresting. The reader's heard that 1,000 times, right? The problem is you find it very interesting. You are very excited by it. In fact, it is the subject matter of your paper, right? So you have a problem. It's a rhetorical problem. You have to get your reader excited about the thing that you're excited about. So you can spend the paragraph using your knowledge to show the reader that this is actually quite interesting. Even though you know it's true, you've known it for a long time and everybody knows it, it's interesting in this particular way, right? So that is a fourth possible challenge. So keep in mind, you can define your terms that way. Now, I've been talking about the reader kind of in an undefined way. And this is really, really important to keep in mind, that the reader is not, in an academic setting, what you might think it is: your teacher, your examiner, your external examiner, these anonymous people that are going to judge you, right? If you sit down to write and you're always writing for your teachers and your examiners, you're not going to find the right tone of voice. You're not going to find a truly academic dignity, if you want to use Hemingway's expression. And that is important to keep in mind. So what you need to do is to find a reader that you respect, a reader that is knowledgeable like you are. So a reader that is as knowledgeable as you are. And who counts as what we in academic discourse call a peer, right? So your teachers are always writing, and they're writing for peers. So their work is getting peer reviewed. Right? And what you want to do is make sure you're directing your writing to people who are intellectual equals. And the best place to find those is in your classes, in your cohort. So what you do is you find somebody who is the most serious, the most intelligent, the most interesting of your fellow students, and you imagine writing to them. So when you're asking this question, here's what I want to say, and sure, I want to say it because I want to pass an exam, but here are the things I want to say, right? In what way are they difficult enough to require a paragraph of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words? Are they hard to believe? Are they hard to understand? Or are they hard to agree with for somebody like me, right? Somebody in my cohort, a fellow student. Some people, when I say the most serious, the most interesting, the most intelligent student in your cohort, you think, that's me, right? So that's easy. Just remember, you can do that. If you do that, just make sure it's you a couple of weeks ago. Right, so it's you, but not you with the knowledge that you have that you're now going to be presenting, right? So that's fine as long as you do it that way. But the best way to do is actually just to have somebody that's at your level, that's keeping up with you, and you're trying to explain it to them on your common terms. You're all knowledgeable people, by the way. You all have, there's lots of things you know, and so that what that means is that you are all in a position to compose coherent prose paragraphs already today. It is like saying you're all in pretty good shape. You could probably run 3 kilometers, right? So, I mean, it all depends on speed and that kind of thing, right? So there's all kinds of parameters, but you can probably go out and do it, right? And the same is true of knowledge. I could get you to write down 3 sentences that you know to be true right now, and then you could have the task of, in a couple of weeks, you know, maybe in a week, maybe next week, you come by, well, actually in a couple of weeks, because we're taking next week off, you come to the next talk in the series, and you show me 3 paragraphs that you have composed based on 3 sentences you wrote down today, as key sentences for those paragraphs that support, elaborate, or defend those three ideas, right? And then the question now is, would that prove that as you sit here right now, you know those three things? You write down three sentences like sense making is a retrospective process, right? And then in a week, you show me a paragraph, or in 2 weeks, sorry, you show me a paragraph that says sense making is that supports, elaborates, or defends the idea that sense making is a retrospective process, right? Now, I think you recognize the rhetoric of that question. It does not prove that sitting here today, you know those three things. What it does prove is that here are three things that if you don't already know them, you could learn them, right? I just have to give you a good reason and some time, and you could learn those three things. So if you want to use paragraph writing as a test for whether or not you are a knowledgeable person in your discipline, what you have to do is give yourself an interesting time limit. And I'm going to give that to you now. The time limit is the following. All right. To be knowledgeable at university is to be able to write a coherent prose paragraph about something of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words that says one thing and supports, elaborates, or defends it in 27 minutes. And the suggestion that I want to make to you is that if you take everything you know and learn how to compose coherent prose paragraphs about anything you know, right? If you take the effort to develop that skill, you're not going to regret that effort. That is a skill you want to have. But if you know it, you can write a coherent prose paragraph about it. Or a well-meaning, intelligent peer whose opinions you respect, somebody who you think is qualified to tell you that you're wrong if you are. Right? That's the setup you want to have. And so I'm doing this way too slowly, but maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and I will show you how to become good at writing paragraphs. One at a time, 27 minutes at a time. How do you become good at writing paragraphs? I'm going to put that up there so we have it for reference. You've probably all heard at some point in your education that you should not start your writing on a blank page. Because if you sit down in front of a blank page and try to see what happens, then all that happens is you become very anxious, right? You sit down and then you worry about whether or not you know anything. So the way you avoid that is the following. It's not actually the trick. It's a good trick for any planning problem that you might have, though. Like just separate it into 2 pieces, you know, before or after. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say today's Wednesday, tomorrow is Thursday. Right? So now we have one day and the next. Very good to know that that's what's happening. Right? One day follows the next. Happens all the time. Happens every day, in fact. It's an everyday occurrence. And every day comes to an end. At the end of every day, and you'll notice I've put it at a reasonable hour, sort of late afternoon, early evening, you decide you're not going to get any smarter. You're not going to acquire any more justified true beliefs. You're not going to become a better conversationalist. Right? You're not going to become wittier. What's going to happen is you're going to start relaxing. So you've spent the day learning, and now you're going to relax. And then a few hours later, you're going to sleep. So notice this. You learn, you stop learning, you relax, then you sleep. It's not you learn, then you sleep. Then you learn, then you sleep, right? Very little trick there. And we'll get into that at a later, in a later session as well. Oh, I'm doing this all wrong here. Keep also in mind that before this week, there was a weekend. And during that weekend, or sorry, during the, I don't know what you did during the weekend, but before the weekend, you were also a knowledgeable person. Right? So you were knowledgeable then, you learned something today, you got to the end of the day. These are important things to keep in mind. At this point, you write down one true sentence that you know. It could be sense making is a retrospective process. It could be the internet has changed the way businesses communicate with their customers. It could be something about the company you're studying. It could be innovation is the creative destruction of capital, or is that right? I think that's roughly right. Innovation is creative destruction in some way. In any case, you write down a sentence like that. I would encourage you to use no more than 5 minutes to do this. Right? Write a sentence you know to be true. Look at it, feel the iceberg underneath it, right? Understand that you know. Write, then I should tell you how to write, right? So I'm going to give you some ideas for this, and you can make your own little plan if you want. The first thing is to keep in mind that when you're writing, you should have a space in which to write. So it could be some sort of office. It could also just be any place like in the library or whatever that you're writing. Remember, and this is just a symbol of it, bookshelf, desk. Notice when you sit down at the desk, you turn your back to the bookshelf. This is not a reading exercise. It is a writing exercise. Draw a little cordon sanitaire across the floor. Remember, there's a door. You close the door, right? Even if it's a symbolic door. It's a great movie from I think from the 1970s with James Garner called Support Your Local Sheriff. It's a Western comedy. Very much recommended. Something bad has happened here. Doesn't matter. We'll have to make another video some other time. That you close the door, but you close it sort of spiritually. And in this movie, this James Garner movie, what happens is he's become sheriff of a town, and he's given a jail that has no bars, it has no door. So he says, I can't use this jail. And they say, well, you have to find a way. And because he's James Garner, he figures out a way. He draws a white line across the floor. And then he tells the first person he puts in the jail that the red splotch of paint outside that red line is the last guy that crossed the white line, right? So you better stay in the jail. And of course, because he's James Garner, he stays in the jail for a while anyway. A door is always a social construction that people respect. So a door is something that you close spiritually, socially, and then people kind of ask you, can I disturb you? And then you can say, no, you can't, because I'm writing, right? So do that. Make sure that you close yourself off from interruptions, at least in the sense that you feel you have the right to tell people to go away for a while, right? Come back in 18 minutes when I'm done writing. And turn your back on the books. The other thing you should do is take exactly the same model for space and make it a model for time. So if you think of the 27 minutes as something you're definitely going to perform, you're definitely going to get through these 27 minutes, right? And what you do is you say, the first 2 minutes and the last 5 minutes are given in advance, right? They are given to you before you even start. You know the first 2 minutes are going to happen. You know the last 5 minutes are going to happen. And that leaves 20 minutes in between, which you then also divide into 2. And so you have 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, and 5 minutes. It's all very easy math, right? But what it does is it gives you structure. Now you can say, what am I going to do in that time? And here's my suggestion. In the first 2 minutes, you work on the key sentence. That's this thing here that you came up with the day before. You came up with a sentence the day before that you thought you knew enough about to write a whole paragraph. Now you're going to test that hypothesis. It's a great little thing to do. You test that hypothesis by spending 2 minutes pitching it to your reader, making sure that it has that difficulty that you're looking for. And the example that I like to use is, suppose you want to say sense making is sometimes a prospective process, right? One way of pitching that to a reader that might disagree with you is to say, some people think sense making is always a retrospective process. Right? Now, the reader reading that says, wow, I think I know what we've got going on here. Right? What's going to happen is you're going to tell me why that's wrong. Right? So we're setting up, we're taking the statement, sense making is sometimes a prospective process, and we're turning it into a rhetorical statement that lets the reader know what we're going to start doing. Right? So the reader gets into the right frame of mind. And we spend 2 minutes of our writing time really working on that sentence. And what that means is that right at 8 o'clock, when I've decided I'm going to start writing, I can easily, simply, directly, straightforwardly just start typing. Right? There's no blank screen. There's no blinking cursor that's just waiting for me to come up with an idea, because I already had a sentence from yesterday. And that's the sentence I'm going to type. And then I'm going to spend 2 minutes figuring out if I should rewrite it just a little bit to pitch it in the right direction for my reader. I'm now going to spend 10 minutes writing as many sentences as I can. And that's probably going to be about 1 sentence per minute. It could be more even. And as you get better and better at this, more and more sentences will come that say more things you know about the the key sentence, right? So they're on the same subject. But remember, you're trying to find ways of helping the reader believe, understand, or agree with you. So they should be easier to believe, easier to understand, or easier to agree with. Right? And normally, if there's a very simple way of doing that, you make sure that they appeal to the things you know under the surface. So if you're writing from your methods, you're going to describe things you actually did. Right? If you're going to say, I did 27 semi-structured interviews, and you want something that's either easier to understand or believe of that nature, you describe the actual interviews, right? Or how you actually pick the people, right? You say things that are just easier to understand. If you're describing theory and you want to elaborate that, you cite the theorists because they are easier to understand or believe, right? The people that your reader has also read, that kind of thing. You just come up with things, as many things as you can in 10 minutes that are easier to believe, understand, or agree with, each of which are expressed in sentences. And you can put extra line returns in between everything during those 10 minutes. You can do whatever you like just to generate. And try to get into a position where you can come up with about 10 sentences altogether in 10 minutes, right? Because then you have, then you have 11 sentences altogether, right? Which is plenty. You then compose. And by compose, I mean, you look at your page and you look at all the sentences you have, and now you start putting them together in that paragraph thing so that you only have 1 line return at the end, unless you've got a block quote in there. And then, of course, you've got a block quote, which is fine. But you basically have a paragraph. So after 22 minutes, you've shaped it into a paragraph. And you've asked yourself, is this the simplest possible way of saying it? Is this the most effective use of my reader's time? And this sort of composure that you're looking for, it's very important to keep in mind, is related to those 200 words, because a reader reading about 200 words will spend about 1 minute doing it. So you have 1 minute of your reader's attention. And what you want to do when you're writing is to create a little moment of your reader's attention that effectively supports, elaborates, or defends one idea. Every time you sit down to do it, you spend 10 minutes specifically on that challenge. Right? You're 22 minutes into your writing moment, it's going well, or it's going badly, it doesn't matter. What happens, you've got to this point because you arbitrarily decided you're going to get to this point. You have gathered your words, you've marshaled your arguments into a shape like that. And then you realize that the right margin is arbitrary, right? It doesn't really mean anything. It's just there because the page ended. So what you've really got is one line of prose that occupies 1 minute of your reader's attention, right? And you chose every one of those words. Every one of those words were your decision. You made a specific decision to put these words in this order. And now you want to find out if it works. So what do? You read out loud. Right? Every time you write a paragraph like this, for either you're doing it for training, just for your own personal improvement, or because you're writing an assignment, you write a paragraph like that, and 22 minutes in, you read it out loud. That will show you something about your writing, and then you react to that. You spend about 1 or 2 minutes reading it out loud, spend 3 or 4 minutes fixing whatever little things you now notice, and you just became a better writer. You then take just a slightly better writer. You then take a 3-minute break and get on with your day. A few years ago, I started jogging because a body like this doesn't just happen. And I discovered, of course, that not every time you go jogging is equally satisfying. Sometimes it's a terrible day for jogging, but you go anyway, right? And if that happens, you don't run another 5 kilometers in order to get the satisfaction you just didn't get from the first 5 kilometers, right? Because you're tired, you're done, you're finished. That's what you had decided to do. You wait until the next time you go out to run and you try to do it better. You try to plan your run a little better. You plan your intervals a little better, right? You maybe even set your route a little bit better. You pick a better place to run where you're more comfortable, this kind of thing. There's lots of things you can do to get the writing to work better and more smoothly. And by reading it out loud and then fixing it and then taking that break and then getting on with your day, you really give yourself that experience, a repeatable experience that you can just kind of feel this can get better. I can get better and better and better at spending these 27 minutes. If 27 minutes sounds like a long time, 18 minutes is fine. Just compress everything. And just notice the math, 27 minutes, 3-minute breaks, that's 2 paragraphs an hour. So if you know you're in that kind of shape, it's nice to know when you're writing an assignment, I can write 2 paragraphs an hour. If you're doing 18-minute paragraphs with 2-minute breaks, that's 3 paragraphs an hour. It's also nice to know. Right? We'll take a break in 4 minutes. All right. If you're working in this way, if you're working in this spirit, and one thing I am realizing about this talk now, and this will improve as we go, and there's lots of other ways I say this on the blog, so you can go back and get this in more detail. I think next time I do this, I'm going to do less of the lead up and more of this, because I think this is but this is available also on the blog. One of the things to keep in mind if you're working this way is the following proportion, right? So I said 27 minutes you're writing, 1 minute is your reader reading, right? So I don't know, The Matrix, is this a cultural reference we can still make without explaining it too much? With Keanu Reeves, right? From the late 90s, I think is the movie now. Keep in mind that when you're writing, you're working in bullet time, right? The reader is there. The reader is somebody you respect, somebody whose authority you respect, somebody who is qualified to tell you that you're wrong, but they're only there for a minute, right? They're going to read your paragraph. It's going to take them 1 minute to do it. you've got 27 minutes to write it. So you're 27 times stronger, 27 times faster, right? 27 times smarter than your reader. If your reader has some sharp criticism and wants to shoot you, right? The reader can shoot you, but you can step out of the way and the bullet flies by. Beautiful visual effect in the movie, right? Just keep in mind, you are superior in that sense. And in between here, there is also a proportion. If we divide 27 by 3, right, we get 9. And it's actually possible to take your paragraph that you've written and give it to your peer, the person you had in mind when you were writing it, right? The fellow student you had in mind when you were writing it. Give it to them, ask them to read it out loud, tell you what they think your key sentence is, tell you whether they think it's hard to believe, understand, or agree with, tell you whether they think you are trying to get them to understand, agree, whether you are trying to support, elaborate, or defend it. So what your rhetorical posture is. And remember that if you've done this deliberately, this has right answers, right? You had a key sentence. You were trying to support, elaborate, or defend it. You did think they would find it hard to believe, understand, or agree with. And you are curious to know what they think. Give your reader 9 minutes. Just sit silently. Don't talk. Don't give them any information. Just ask them to read it out loud and answer those questions, and then reflect on whatever the content of the paragraph is, and then say, thank you very much. The 9 minutes are up. I'm going to go off. And you can go off along with your day. I'll take that information with you. I'm very grateful. I'll do it for you some other time if you want, right? We don't need to debrief any more than that. I just needed some information about how this paragraph works on a reader, right? Every time you do that, you learn something. It's very, very rich feedback experience. Please remember, it is not a judgment. Don't ask them to tell you whether it's good or bad. Don't ask them to tell you whether or not you're right or wrong, except insofar as if they disagree with you, right? But don't let them judge you. Just let them respond as the reader you thought they were. That gives you information. It's an experience of being read. It's not an act of being judged. That'll make you a better writer. Yeah, and keep that reader, pick a reader your own size, you're at eye level. Do you want to do you have a quick question, or do we want to take a break and then?
How often should we practice?
Every day.
Every day.
Yeah, my suggestion is that you pick 8 weeks 4 times a year. And what I normally do is say 8 weeks up to week 42, 8 weeks after week 42, roughly up to Christmas, 8 weeks up to Easter, and 8 weeks after Easter. And you can adjust however you like, however your plans are. And then say for every one of those days, I'm going to write at least half an hour and at most 3 hours a day. So that gives you up to, or a minimum 40 paragraphs for every 8-week period. Maximum is like 240. 240 paragraphs is basically a master's thesis, right? In 8 weeks of 3 hours a day. I realize I'm setting the bar at a particular level. You can decide where you want to put it. If you write every other day, that's half as good, obviously, right? But it's something you can do every day. You don't need a day of rest, like if you're running. You can do it every day. And if you're trying to make decisions about whether or not to do an hour, like to decide on 2 paragraphs the day before and then write, you just make a plan that just says, I'm going to do 2 in a row. Insofar as you can spread it thin, so you're writing fewer paragraphs a day, but more days in a row, that's usually better. But of course, ideally, the more paragraphs, the better. So if you have to do it, if you have to compress it into days like that, then your class schedule might be irrelevant there. Another good thing to do is to, as much as possible, start writing at the same time every day. So pick a time that you can repeat every day so that your body kind of gets used to, this is what we do at this time. So your brain is kind of getting used to being on in the right way at that time of day. And it's usually best to do it as the first thing, not the last thing. this part is hard. You've decided what you want to say, and then you're not going to think about it until tomorrow morning. Part is hard, but it's important because it lets your unconscious do some work. So you have to actually be unconscious of the thing. You don't have to be literally unconscious. You just have to be unconscious of the idea that you're trying to write. And that will, so it sounds a little bit mystical, right? But this is what authors tell you, is that if you develop this habit of telling yourself what you're going to write about tomorrow repeatedly, then it's kind of like ordering a package and then just showing up in the morning and picking it up. Right? The paragraph kind of arrives out of your head, right? And of course, partly because you're getting used to this as well. You're getting used to, I'm going to work on the key sentence for a couple of minutes. I'm then going to generate things I know. So your unconscious is getting ready to go through all those moves, right? And then I'm going to have some time to compose it, make sure it sounds good, feels good. I'm going to listen to it myself. I'm going to speak it out loud, that kind of thing. So yeah, as often as possible. And like I say, if you do 32 weeks of the year like this, which is I can never remember, it's 200, no, it's 160 days. If you do 4 times 8 weeks, right? 160 days where every day starts with writing or deliberately not writing. So here's something actually to keep in mind. And I think it's something that's maybe more related to the how to enjoy things lecture talk. But if you at least say that at the end of every day for those 160 days a year, I'm going to decide whether or not and what if to write about, then you're reminding the part of you that wants to become a better writer that you're serious, right? And that part of you wants to be acknowledged. And if you acknowledge that part of you every day, even by not writing, even just by saying, we've made a conscious decision not to write tomorrow. We haven't just not gotten to it. We decided not to write tomorrow. Your unconscious can relax about the writing. So, okay, don't have to prepare for tomorrow because we're not going to write. That's a really good strategy, just to have a part of your brain that's being well taken care of, being treated to some exercise, and getting progressively better. Right?